Hello, and welcome to the Tantric Energetics podcast. I'm your host, Mino, and I'm joined by the founders and directors of Tantric Energetics, Dr. Mazen Harb and Krisana Locke. Tantric Energetics is a platform for transformation. Today's topic is about strategy, strategic thinking. And so if you're sitting in your life and you're saying, I have no direction, I don't know what to do, or you're facing dilemmas and you don't know how to solve them, today's session will be all about strategy. And so what I find funny and a bit interesting at times, because we talk a lot about non-attachment, not kind of being a slave to the mind, if I'm going to just be very direct. And I've heard people in workshops say, so you hate the mind, you're against the mind, you hate the brain, which is quite funny because there's no disrespect to the mind. We just want the mind to know its proper role in things. But today, I think we're going to pay some respect to the mind and talk about some of the beautiful things the mind can do for us, particularly its executive function and how it supports us to create a strategy and move forward in life. To begin, I'm going to start by just saying, where does the word strategy come from? It is a Greek word, and I'm Greek, and so it comes from the military, and it actually in Greek, it translates to military. So everything we're talking about has a very militaristic origin. And so we will also be talking about war and military and strategy. And of course, when we talk about the modern work world and corporate strategy, which we'll also touch upon, we're talking about people who were serving in war who then started businesses. So at least in the United States, the majority of businesses that were started were either started because of the war or right after the war. And even if they were before the war, World War II, they took the principles of the military and put them into the corporate culture. And so there is a lot of kind of DNA from military in the working world and the world that we live in. But in my opinion, and we're going to show this in a little bit, I think every single person on this planet, every human is a strategist. Every human being has a strategy. And so we're going to get into some of those strategies and why I believe every human being is a strategist. So we've acknowledged the kind of military influence on strategy. Let's talk about three big concepts within strategy. The first is to have an objective, a strategic objective. This is really our motivation for doing something. Why are we doing something? For instance, one of the individuals I'll be referencing throughout the podcast today is a former captain. I believe he was a captain in the British military. His name is B.H. Littlehart. And Hart was someone who studied military. So he served in World War I, but he also was someone who studied the military. And one of the things he talks about is that the objective of any war should be to make peace. And so that is why we're going into war, is to make peace, which is a bit ironic, but that's the end state of what you want to get to. Having said that, many people, countries, people, generals, they lose sight of the objective. And so if you forget your objective, you end up in a very different situation. I'll use the United States as an example within our lifetimes. So the United States went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it had no clear objective. And so it stayed in these countries for over 20 years with no objective. People were dying. We spent tons of money. It pretty much arguably will end up being one of the reasons the American empire falls. And we did it because there was no clear objective in those engagements. So no matter what we do in life, we have an objective, which is really our motivation for doing something. It's our why. Our strategy is the path we take to get there. It's the how. How am I going to achieve my objective? And so a lot of our conversation today is going to be about how we do things. And then finally, in the military, you hear about tactics. Tactics is all about the small things we do each and every day that adds up to our strategy. And so we're going to be talking about all of these. You don't have to remember these right now, but that's some basic definitions to begin our conversation. So let's return back to strategy. Strategy is how we organize ourselves. Even if I say I have no strategy or I make no choices in life, that is still a choice. That is still something I'm choosing to do, is to basically not have a way to orientate and organize myself. I personally believe that everyone has some sort of strategy. We have a life strategy. We have a work strategy. We have a health strategy. It's how we basically make choices and prioritize things. So our strategy is the summation of our choices. It's what our behaviors add up to. And I believe that when you bring intention and awareness to your strategy, then you can really look at what decisions you're making and the behaviors that you're choosing to occupy. If you have an unconscious strategy, so you never sit down to actually think about this, it means we're really at the whims of our unarticulated desires and emotions. And so a lot of today is going to be talking about these topics and going a bit deeper into the different elements of strategy, how we do things, how we choose to do things. So I'm going to begin by going to a topic that I enjoy, which is more about the child development. And again, I'll posit that each one of us is a strategist. So I think even a baby is a strategist. And so, not to surprise or shock you, but Krisana, I'm going to ask you a question soon. But we're talking about babies. So, for instance, when a baby has a need, it cries. So it wants something, has an objective: feed me, love me. It cries. And then over time, if the child is neglected, it might stop crying. It might go silent. And in that silence, it might also be able to actually reach its objective. So we all learn, as even from babies to children, we learn different behaviors that help us get what we want. So Krisana, can you tell us a little bit about, as a child, what are some of the strategies that children employ to get what they want?
Well, when a baby cries, it doesn't have a lot of cognitive mental processes so far. So it's really it's wanting, it's a response, and then the parents come to support it. But as a child, as we grow up, we learn conditioning and behaviors from our family and parents how to get something. So we learn from our parents how to get love and how to receive something, how to, yes. So we learn very early from our parents and from our schooling on how to lose. Okay, I'm going to do from a point from my work, how we lose touch with ourselves and we go into conditionings, how to get something. And then we sidestep our feelings, but we start to use processes of wants and needs. So from very early on, children start to mirror and learn how to get things. And by the time you're 6 years of age, 7 years of age, you've already downloaded a lot of your early blueprint of how you're going to be in your life. And also when you grow up, how you use that imprint in work, in relationships, and in direction with your life. That's all I'm going to say.
And so if we consider that the what I was referring to as the unconscious strategies we pick up in life, right? So I might behave a certain way to get what I want, and personally, interpersonally, with in institutions and structures. Tell me a difference between someone who's kind of in that conditioned state, so they have these unconscious strategies, and then what is it like when someone actually brings awareness to their strategies and starts to be more intentional with their behaviors and relationships? What's the difference between those two?
Okay, so you may have a strategy at work, and you in a team you have a strategy and you have an objective, and you all go to pursue this. But someone may have unconscious, I wouldn't call them strategies, unconscious desires that they want to get something out of this through the strategic plan, which can sabotage the outcome that's going to happen. So we have a lot of unconscious desires and behaviors that we're not aware of that come in play, which is called sabotaging an outcome, or even sabotaging in ourselves in our own direction in work. This is being played out in our unconscious. Even if we have a strategy to put something forward, we have these unconscious desires that come up and stop it from happening.
And so for me, and this is again my take, I'm not saying I'm absolutely right. For me, I still think that those folks have, let's call it a strategy. It's just they don't know they have one. It's the
Yes.
unconscious, like autopilot strategy, if I call it that.
Yes, they're in the subconscious, they have an intention to have an outcome. It's been framed in their unconscious, which is 90% is run of our unconscious and 10% of our conscious mind. So it's been set up to have an outcome. But what this intention that's been set up, it may be a negative outcome. So it is on your conscious mind, you want to do this and go this way to the left. But in your subconscious mind, you have set up an outcome that is going to send you right. It's the easiest way I can say it. So it's been framed already. And so you have to go in and connect and reframe this outcome to have a positive intention for you that does serve an outcome that goes the right way.
And again, I'll extend that even further. I think that over time, these repeated behaviors that we adopt as children, the kind of blueprint that we take on, these tend to form over time identities, which I believe is what personality tends to become.
Yes.
Personality to me is a behavioral strategy that you then start to identify with. And what's interesting is, so we can go through all the different personality facets, right? I'm an emotional person. So my strategy is to have heightened emotions, or I'm very even keeled or even numb, right? That's a different strategy. One strategy is like I'm super organized, like that's a behavioral strategy. So I'm a very type A, meticulous person. A different behavioral strategy could be I'm disorganized, I'm very chaotic. I allow everything in my environment to kind of take control. What I find fascinating is the more I've worked on myself, the more I've started to kind of even go beyond these behavioral strategies. So I think about introversion, extroversion. If you had asked me my whole life, I'd probably say I'm an introvert. And now I look at myself at work, and there's times I have to reach out to hundreds of people for our company, Three Peak. And there's times that I enjoy being alone. I've started to get to the point where I can't even call myself introvert or extrovert. It almost has lost meaning to me. I don't even know what the words mean in that sense, because I need to do what's in front of me. I have to do what's needed of me. So I've stopped even thinking about introversion, extroversion. I just think about what do I need to do in this moment? Reach out to someone or be alone? I've become almost indifferent to that personality facet. I just do what the situation calls for. But for most of my life, I did have an identification with being an introvert.
Oh.
So Mazen, if I think about behavioral strategies that people pick up that then kind of become personality over time, what do you think is some of the positives and maybe some of the hindrances of this kind of way of looking at oneself, of like, I have a personality, this is who I am, this is my behavioral strategy in life?
What's the hindrances and the advantages, right? When we don't have yet a crystallized ego, which is, I'll explain what is ego. Ego is how we identify ourselves. So when people say, I have lots of ego, I need to get rid of it. First, we need to identify ourselves with our personalities. Ego is a structure that helps us to have a defense mechanism. And through that defense mechanism, we create a strategy to deal and adapt at certain times with the outside world. But then that becomes, as you said, identified. So it will help us navigate to a certain degree to understand who we are and to have a certain constants, right? So I feel good about myself because I am like this and I'm like that. So I start to belong to a certain category of people. So before letting go of that, it's good to have a strategy to reach to that crystallization of that defense mechanism, which we might here call ego. Because if we don't have it yet, we are fluctuating in a place where society doesn't yet allow it. I'm fluctuating without a certain identification. So we kind of feel non-belonging. I give an example. Moving from childhood to puberty, and then, it's really an identity crisis, because everything that the child has recognized itself, now it's really different. Going to teenagerhood, and actually the most difficult thing is moving from teenagerhood to post-teenagerhood. And actually, and you notice until reaching the age of 25, this is where the most intellectualism happened, the most reading, schooling, university. We're trying to figure out where we fit in the world at large, and this is where we start to create an identity, not only the emotional one that Krisana talked about that brought the blueprint and our behaviors, but also on an intellectual level. I am like this, and actually, because it will help very much to carve and then find the job we need, find the partner we need. Do we decide I want to have a family, I want to have kids? So a lot of differentiation starts to happen in that identification. So it has a tremendous purpose until we are 25. To be able to go through this very fast amount of growth in a very short time. It's always changing. After that, between 25 and 30 is really you going deep into something that you need. Either you're going to be in a work, either go deep if you're doing a PhD, or if you created a family. So it's really diving in, or if you want to explore life and to be hedonistic and travel the world. So this is where it really happens. But when hitting the age of 30, you have certain threshold. You have then this, like, the crystallization that reach its peak, and you're like, which direction do I want to continue? And again, when it hits around 40, you already went through that direction. I'm like, is that who I want to be? I already have lots of money, but is that the job I want? Or I already have kids and family, but is that fulfilling me? Am I doing the thing I love? Or, I guess more for us, I did all this personal development work, all this healing work. I feel ready for the world. I'm like, but now let us focus on business. So another way, let me learn about more how to penetrate the business world and bring all this personal development work we do there. So identities are very, very, very important. But in the same time, since they're really we attach to them, that's what brings us illnesses, issues, because it will, as much as brought up adaptation, it's bring us maladaptive behaviors, because we start to consider that those personalities are who we are. And we cannot anymore see all the potential, how we were when we were in puberty or in childhood. So we start to have a narrow way of thinking. So funnily enough, that was very strategic to who we are, and have the best strategies early on. We're like, all potential, we need to have strategies. We start to see smaller, and we reach when we are 40 years of age, if some people 50 or 60, and we're like, but I cannot, because I decided who I am. But actually, where we don't know, and that's the scary part, how to let go of all strategies that has been accumulated, but now they are outdated. Hence, that's what we call crisis during our 30s, crisis during our 40s, crisis during our 50s, or crisis during our 60s. Depends on the people where in our phase in evolution. So to resume, creating strategy is a must to crystallize our ego, so we can have a direction in life, so we can focus on what we're doing and fully 100% believe in it. But once we go and do it and finish it, we have to let go of it and reopen to see who we are, what we need, and what if something else needs. So it allows us to continue growing in a sustainable, conscious, and very fun way.
I really love what you shared, and I kind of a bit repeat myself, but for me, when we get stuck in personality, it means we only have one type of tool we're going to use. So every situation I meet, I'm going to be an introvert, because that's the only behavioral strategy I've tested out. For me, one of the beautiful moments of leadership is when we can expand the breadth of behaviors we're willing to try on, to see almost the extremes that we're possible of, to then know how to toggle between these different parts of behavior. So I can both be extremely introverted and extremely extroverted, and anywhere in between. And what ended up happening for me is I started to now become fully situational. I just ask, what is needed of me in this moment? And that's what I will do. It has gone beyond my identification. It's even gone beyond a need for a particular strategy. I just use the strategy that I need in the moment I need it. So one of the things that can trigger, you said, is crisis. And I'll share you one of my crisis that was a big learning moment and asked me to really reflect upon my own strategies. And this is when I feel like one of the first times in my life, intentional conscious strategy started to turn on. I'm not saying it was necessarily the right strategy, but that part of my brain started to activate. So I felt tremendous pressure throughout my schooling to get into university. And I was a very good student, top of my class. I did well in the testing. I did 1,000 clubs. I was the president, vice president. I did like everything. Like I thought I was like perfect, man. Like I was, in the honor society, the music society. I played American football. I was a musician that was in like the all-state bands. Like check, 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 check. Right, great grades, everything. And then I really just was like, I'm going to work so hard. I'm going to be so disciplined, and I'm going to get this big objective, which is to go to university. And my dream, which was either, I don't know, my own or implanted in me, was like, I'm going to go to the Ivy League schools in the United States. So I really wanted to go to Columbia University in New York City. And that was like the dream, the dream, the dream. And then I applied to the Ivy League schools, and I got rejected from every single one. And so not a single school I wanted to go to accepted me. And at that time, when I was 17 or whatever, it was a huge crisis because I was like, everything I've poured myself into, working every night, all-nighters, doing all this work, just this like kind of blunt force. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I didn't get what I wanted. And meanwhile, I had a friend of mine who's a close, dear friend, and he had a very different life strategy than me at that point in time. And so I remember he got this like kind of part-time job. There was this pizzeria, and the pizzeria basically, they said, if you stand on the corner and hand out these flyers and you get people to take a picture and post it on social media or whatever with the flyer, if you can get 10 people to do that, we're going to pay you $100 and buy you 2 pizzas or whatever it was. And so my friend was like, yeah, cool, great. So he went to the location. He observed that he was not going to be observed. They're going to leave him autonomous. So he basically just called 10 of his friends and said, hey, if you post a picture of yourself on social media, I'll give you a slice of pizza. And so the 10 friends did it. And then he took the rest of the flyers and he threw them in the trash. And then he showed up at the end. He showed the proof. I got the 10 people to post. I'm out of flyers. I want the 2 pizzas and the $100. They said, great, here you go. And I remember hearing that story and it like broke me, like it destroyed me because I was like, wow, this is a person who looked at the objective and looked at the straightest line possible to get to the objective. And just, he did it. He got there, he won, right? And I was looking at myself at that time where I was like, I'm working, 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 and I have nothing to show for it. And so something in me, it broke something in me. And so I had a new epiphany where I was like, my new life strategy is I'm going to try and find the shortcuts in life. Like that was the thing that dawned on me in that moment is I'm not going to work hard and as hard anymore in that way. I'm going to be clever now, clever and work hard. And of course that led me on a different journey, which you can listen to other podcasts to hear how that went in my life, but not great. But it was a different life strategy. So I adapted, I learned something, quote unquote. And when I was thinking about this podcast episode, what came up for me, Mazen, was when you did experiments with mice and how when you looked at the data, you found that there was actually 3 different behavioral strategies that mice picked up. And so I would love for you to share a little bit about the experiment and learning and behavioral strategies, because I think it's a very beautiful illustration of strategy.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm delighted you brought that. Actually, I didn't think about it until now. And this was a beautiful discovery. I started working in a neuroscience department, so doing my PhD in neuroscience on learning and memory, the effect of substances, uh, drugs, substance of abuse, and drugs, or even stress or motivation on learning and memory, right? So it's all about behavior and how we learn. So actually, it's all about strategy. The literature back then, it was really, or the science in that you really create a plan, and then you have a hypothesis, then you have the model, then you have the way how you make the lab animals actually do it, and so you test it. Then you go and analyze it, and you really need to be statistical significance, so you can say this worked or that didn't work. At the time, I was working really on appetitive substances. So actually, I would like condensed sugar. I don't know, like condensed fatty milk. That really at that time mice do like that. Very high rewarding food. So we find the best way to make them consume it is to starve them a little bit, just to make a small food restriction. And that was the paradigm in order to see how they learn, right? And the learning was to see, I don't remember what was the question, but I was checking their behavior. Then I put them into groups, and then I started to see that, yeah, they all go toward the middle, like constant middle. They all learning like a good average, but actually it didn't make a difference. I didn't understand. Something was a little bit off. I have what it's written in the literature, but I was looking at the data and say it statistically. I was like, something is off here, and I started to check. I took those numbers, the data numbers I have. I'm like, but one moment, I don't want to just put them all together and see what's the result, because I started to see certain behaviors I was observing, and I'm like, and then actually what we discovered, and I invite you, if you want, you can Google my name, and there's like 4 articles based on what we discovered in strategic learning and then adaptation. And then I discovered that there are 3 kind of learning and strategy that is developed, which the first one was, I had to call it a name. We called it sign tracking behavior. The second one is goal tracking behavior. The third one, forgot what was in it, intermediary tracking behavior. So sign ST, GT, IT. And then later on, for the next remaining 4 years, every experiment I did, it was always there. So it was always in front of our eyes. But when we plot them together, it disappeared. And we make like, oh, all humans are together. If you give them this kind of food or this kind of drug or this kind of stress, they will behave that way. And at that time, I was a bit revolting against homogenization and then this fundamentalism of the way how we think and feel in cultures, whether it's politic or religion. So then when I went to it and then I checked it, so the sign tracking animals, so how used to learn, I was doing a conditioning. It's called the Pavlovian and operant conditioning. So some animals, when they connected the signal coming, a stimuli that coming, and then they really in their memory, they connected the stimuli with the giving of the reward. Whenever they see the stimuli, the reward is there. So the moment they learned after a few days, the moment they see the light going, they ran away toward where the food is delivered, and then they were ready for it. So those are the signs, like all their being, all their body strategy became very motoric in a sense. The moment there's light, they run like crazy. The speed between the light and then running and being under the tray, waiting for the milk, is just really, really amazingly fast. So this is the sign tracking. And the same animals, actually, they're the same strain, they're in the same cage, they're the same everything we did with them, similar. Then there is another category, which is goal tracking.
Cool.
Yeah. So goal track is mainly they went there, they really learned that they can really, like, it's all operant conditioning. They can go, they have influence on the outcome. They went there and they really touched the light to make it come, and then go and then having the food. Right, so they went and they knew if they do something comes. So they never waited for the food. They went there and then they start to click to see if it works. So they really went with, and the last group, it really fluctuating between the two strategies. I really invite the people go there and then read it, because honestly now I'm like, probably I forgot something. Like I explained it, but the detail of it is more in the articles. It's been a long time I didn't look at it. And the funny part of it is most animals and most batch group over the 4 years, it went into one third, one third, one third, more or less fluctuating. So from thinking that if we control the environment and the genes, the same genetic gene, most of them are siblings, and then put them all together, we will have them having one adaptive behavior and strategy. And then we always end up having three, either this or that, and those one who do this and that.
If you recall, can you tell us a little bit more about the intermediate group? Because if I recall, there was some confusion about their behavior, but then actually the way they were adapting was something that was quite fascinating to look at, because they weren't strictly one behavior or the other.
So I really need to, just when I'm trying to recall it in my brain, there are the ones who are really sign tracking. So they wait. Whenever there's a sign, they go there, touch it, and they get the reward. So they're very fast. They remain during the whole experiment, fluctuating between both. Fluctuating between this strategy and the other, this strategy and the other. So they didn't take on one identity, if you want to call it identity. This is what I can say. And then you're like, did they learn? Yes, they learned, but their own way. They have choices, and they played with both choices in response, toward the response. Yeah.
And so what we see is that animals do have kind of, I'll call it strategic acumen. Like they can orchestrate things and coordinate and move towards an objective. For instance, there's lately been I think it's whales are attacking human ships, and they figured out how to take out propellers. And so there's clearly a strategy that they're employing to routinely take out boats and ships. I watched a documentary, I think probably about a year ago, that was one of the most fascinating nature documentaries I've ever watched, which is called Chimp Empire. And I won't go too deep into it because it's such a good story and it's such a good documentary. But one of the things that was fascinating is there's two rival tribes of chimps, and they go to war with each other, but they have two completely different strategies. In one tribe, it's a very male dominance hierarchy. So the males are competing for an alpha position. And so there's constant infighting and war to become the alpha, and there's all this fear. And only the male chimps go to war. In the other one, it's actually an egalitarian society, and they live next to each other, I think, in the Congo. So the egalitarian society, both the female and male chimps fight alongside each other, and they don't have this desire for hierarchy. They each have clear functional roles within the tribe. And so it's interesting to see that there's an actual strategy playing out, a cultural strategy, almost like a battle strategy. And so animals are capable, even when we see, I believe it's wolves or lions, they can coordinate their attacks on prey when they want to eat. And so I always find it kind of interesting that, again, humans, we're not the only ones that can form strategies. Animals many times have these different learned behaviors. And so, Krisana, I have a question for you, which is, we've been talking about sometimes we can get a bit stuck in a strategy. So we develop a bit of this tunnel vision. So for instance, if I look at the example I gave of my story, where I thought the only way to get ahead in life was you work like crazy. It's kind of this really kind of brute force. I never thought about being clever. I never thought about thinking about the shortest way to the goal, the way my friend was with the pizza coupons. What is the hindrance if we get really tunnel vision in life, if we get really stuck on a strategy?
Well, when we go into tunnel vision and we're very much focused on one objective, then we're going to miss out a lot on a lot of other things that are happening in life around us. So that's the narrowing down. You're going to miss other opportunities that may come along that you need to shift and turn when you have a strategy. But if you just focus on one way, so that's what I would say.
And so for me, strategy, I've been kind of saying it a few times, is what we do. It can be a plan, but it is not a plan. So many people put together a plan and say, I have a strategy. But if you don't actually execute that strategy or organize around that strategy, then that's not your strategy. It's just a piece of paper with some writing on it. So I sometimes when I'm working with executives, with leaders, CEOs, they have this idea of this is my strategy. This is what I put down on a piece of paper. This is what I must be doing. But in reality, they're not really aligning their energy, time, or money around that plan. So one of the questions I ask in coaching that tends to kind of whatever jar people is I have them articulate their priorities. So like, what's your priorities in life? They'll be like 1, 2, 3. And I'll say, look at your calendar. And can you tell me if you bucket the activities on your calendar, what do you spend time on? And then they'll tell me something that's completely divorced of their priorities. So their priorities could be, I'm making it up, like I want to increase revenue, I want to decrease costs. And then I look at what they're spending their time on, and they're like, whatever, scrolling on social media, they're having pointless meetings. Like, I'm making this again up in the moment, but the way they're allocating their energy is completely divorced of the priorities they say they have, which is why I talk about strategy as where we allocate our resources. It's what we're actually doing. And I go back to it can be an unarticulated strategy if we don't have consciousness and awareness around what we're doing. Or if we bring awareness, our strategy then is something that is intentional. So we know that our priorities that we talk about or write on a piece of paper are in alignment with our actions. That to me is real strategy. And so, Mazen, you also work with CEOs, leaders. Have you observed this mismatch between what people espouse, what they say their priorities are, and what they're actually doing in their day to day?
Yeah, definitely. Because when those two things are aligned, results is inevitable. And I'm not saying positive or negative, only positive result. I'm like results. Because strategy, it's not, we do not know what's the outcome. We know where we're going. So you need to have negative results. At least when you have negative results or positive results or any results, you can adapt. There is no one strategy fits it all, and there is no one strategy in a business or in life that really we have to stick to it. And that's called dogma, actually. That's called religion, or that's called cultural dogma. So a strategy is, for me, it's something, and when I notice a lot working with people, it's to learn how to be able to adapt constantly and then really go toward from a strategy toward at least a little bit of result, reflect about it, and then see what is needed. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes. If I, Krisana, think about, again, there's potentially a mismatch between what people say is important to them and what they're actually doing. When you've worked with people, how do you square that mismatch in terms of, well, I want this, but what I'm doing is completely divorced of that reality?
Can you give me an example? You know
So
how I
let's
like to work in the moment. I really like to work with people and not just theory. So give me an
so
example.
let's say someone comes to you and they're like, my strategy is to start some kind of project, business endeavor. And then you notice that, well, what is this actually person doing with their energy? And they're actually just spending all their time dreaming,
Mhm.
right? Just thinking about it, but they don't make any concrete steps. So the objective is to start a project, but the behavioral strategy is dreaming. So when
Mhm.
you're working with someone, you notice this mismatch. How do you kind of square that and how do you work with that individual?
Okay, so when I work with that individual, I know that that outcome is not going to happen because it's just an idea and that hasn't had any, so they're not grounded. They haven't set any steps on the way to get to that objective. So when I work with them, I would set up what are the priorities, as you said before. What's important? What do you need to bring in first to make that happen? And also to really ask them if it's just dreaming and illusions and ideas, and to really see if to get a business plan, get a business strategy together, and also to get on their own internal mindset and body to really see that it will not happen unless they're also grounded in their body and centered to have this outcome to start a business or go through it. So I look at both from the cognitive and also from the body to the grounding foundational principles to drive that through the body. That's what I would do.
And so when we talk about strategy, there's also two types of strategy. I'll include now a new concept. There's something that is called top-down strategy, and there's something called bottoms-up strategy. So top-down strategy is intuitive strategy. It means that I have certain principles that filter my decision-making, but I'm acting on a feeling, a vision. Bottoms-up is a very analytical, kind of more cognitive way of putting together a strategy. So I'll give you a personal example, which just shows how kind of nerdy I used to be back in the day. Probably still am, but I was also back in the day. I used to develop, because I was really interested in developing strategy, I used to do a really kind of intense journaling system. So every day I would journal. I would write about my day and what happened. And then once a week, I would read all my journals from that week and I would try to spot patterns. And so I would circle and underline patterns across the 7 journal entries. And I would do a weekly entry about those patterns. And then once a month, I would read the 4 weekly ones and look for patterns and spot and circle. And in that monthly one, I would write patterns down from the weekly one. And then once a quarter, so every 3 months, I would look at the 3-month journal entries and I would spot patterns and circle and underline. I swear to God, I did this for like a few years. And then once a year, I would look at the 4 quarterly journal entries and I would circle and underline for patterns. And what I was looking at is a very analytical bottoms up way to understand myself, and a bottoms up, it's just because it's all data based. And then there's a different approach, which is I can just sit there and reflect on my life and be in a state of being, in reflection, in vision, and be like, this is the direction I should go. This is what is happening with me. This is how I should. So over time, I learned to drop the bottoms up analytical way and to adopt a more top down intuitive way. Personally, I think there's room for both. I think there's value in both. I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. They both have strengths and they both have hindrances, but over time I've come to believe that the top down can have some more benefit for me, at least. So Mazen, there's these kind of two approaches, right? There's the more vision, intuition, and there's I do an analysis to figure out where I'm going. Can you tell us a little bit between those two? What do you see as strengths and weaknesses of those two approaches?
I'm holding back from sharing the method we created in 3P Coaching and Solution, the company that work with businesses and executive leaders. It's part of our functional human system method that's now we sent to be patented, hopefully soon in the next year to come. And actually it's the core fundamentals behind the creation of every project. So I'm like, I hear you. If before we discovered this method, I would have answered without having what have in front of me. But I cannot hold myself. There are principles and rules in life. And of course, because in 3P, I am the managing director of science and innovation. So when three of us created that, gave me lots of joy to lead that project with both of you. Until you both said, okay, now let us give it to the world. So there are 3 components of our being. They have to be respected and understood. There is our feeling body, feeling self. It's where we have our intuition, where we have the vision, where we open up to visions. And then imagination, when we create a vision. Lots of artists are in there. We have the part that we act it out. We go, and then the ones we try, and then we try. It's really about using the physical body to pin down that vision, to make it a reality. And now there's a third part and the fourth, which both of them belong to the brain. All right. One part is the creative ability of the brain, which is we're gonna call the creative thinking. So it's a part of the brain that gives the creative thinking. which is where reflection happens. You have lots of scientists, philosophers, but in order to activate that part, one need to have data. One need to have a bit of feeling, one need to have tried something or read something and then feel it. And then you have the second part of the brain, which is the thinking brain. So it's not the creative thinking, it's the critical thinking. Okay? And that is really based on numbers, on past experiences, and not on reflecting what the outside, what is possible, not on creating hypothesis and theory based on what we feel. It's only based on what is lived, what has happened on this planet, what do we know about the galaxy, and nothing outside of numbers, yes, and text. So to go and answer, I really have to draw with those 4 quadrants and to really explain that based what we discovered, actually, all nature, everything in nature, everything in our body, everything in organization, every project we create, every endeavor we do has to go through a cycle. And that cycle has to be respected. And the moment we do not respect that cycle, we hit crisis. So it's the moment where adaptation and strategy is not working. So when we, based on that, and later on I'll explain how it's the route, because there are many routes that can go, pathways. But when we start with building, you said, we're starting with the critical thinking. It's beautiful. The critical thinking normally is really allowing us to build something. Yes, it worked. Like just to based on what you have, create something, it works. But does that help us in life to adapt? Only to a certain degree. If I only create top down, what is happening is I'm based on that building, I'm not ready. I'm the least ready actually for new thing, new crisis, new opportunities. I'll give you an example. You are in that company or created a project or anything. COVID comes, the pandemic comes. What do? Because you only work on analysis and only on the critical thinking, which is actually the ego part of the brain. So reality exists only in numbers and in identities and only what I know. And beyond what I know, I don't know. I don't know. I don't trust it. But then pandemic happens. Lots of companies disappeared because they were not in contact with the creative side, intuitive side, and even adventurous side to try different things. The companies that survived the pandemic, it's just they had the biggest ability to re-strategize, go back, go from building and critical thinking to open creative thinking, reflect on what's working. And when they failed to reflect because the situation that we had was very new, they went back to scratch. What is scratch? Going to intuition, going to reimagine this product, this service. And that's the beginning of a cycle. And so those ones who are able to go back to the beginning and then start again, they'll have higher chance to adapt fast. And everyone who gets stuck in only feeling, but not moving and trying it, also will be stuck. So there is not one strategy fits it all. There's a movement. I see strategy. It's a movement of things. But whenever you find that outcome you want, you should never sit still. You should be open and constantly reflect back, build, reflect back. And when the building ends, go back, reimagine. And then when you reimagine, go try it, and then reflect again. So no part can be separated and left on the side. Those 4 parts of the body-brain system has to work together constantly to allow the best adaptation and strategies upon strategy to always evolve to fit the need at the moment.
I have a question because it was interesting when you said you work top, then bottom. So this is a mental process you're talking about.
Yes.
So
Correct.
we're going to see this. So you're going into the mental processes and not including the whole cycle that Mazen was saying. So it's going from the intuitive to the analytical. So it's a mental process, and we've missed out on the other parts, components when we're in the cycle of life.
Yes.
Very interesting. Yes.
So I'll
Yes.
resume it. So in a way, like this, like The down is the intuition, the up is the analytical, and then what's in between is the trial, and then the reflection. So this is where, the bottom, analytic intuition, or the opposite, intuition analytical.
Yes. And then when
Yeah, I
I'm
think we're
working,
using different
yeah,
terminology, which can get
yes,
confusing. For
it can
me,
get
when I talk
confusing.
about top down, I talk about intuition as top down. So it's that I have a vision, and from that vision, things
Mm.
cascade down. When I talk about bottoms up, it's I have a bunch of data points, and then I build a castle out of those data points. So it's
Okay.
a little bit different because we're talking about, I
Okay.
think, two different systems. So
Yes.
thank you, Krisana, for bringing
Yeah. I was
clarification there.
Thank
thinking, I
you.
was
Okay.
like, and then I have another system with the brain, the mind, and then there's the body. And when you're just in the mind, you forget the body. Yeah. So just so listeners and our audience can understand. Yeah.
Yes. And so, based on what Mazen was sharing, for me, it's an important reminding moment, which is strategy is always in service of some vision. And if it's not in service of a vision, then I go back to what I opened the podcast with is you get into these forever wars, like the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq, where you have no clue where you're going. And rather than have the, I guess, humility to take a step back, to reflect, right, and figure out what the hell you're doing, you just keep going, 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 going. And so this also relates to people, because I talk to a lot of folks or coach folks when they have that either the midlife crisis or they have a moment of, I have no direction in life. But the only way you'll get direction in life is if you go to reflect, which means you have to step away from doing. You have to step away from doing. So create the space for yourself. Take a weekend off, go book an Airbnb, go to a vision quest, like go do something that is non-doing. And from there, allow yourself to then have the space to have a vision, to try something, to reinvent yourself. But you're going to be a beginner again. It's going to be back to the seed of potential. You're going to go back to the beginning, but you have to reflect to start something new, to reinvent yourself. So the strategy always has to serve the vision. If you feel like you have no vision, then I really don't know what your strategy is in service of other than just maintenance, just kind of the status quo and just inertia.
Sure.
Like this is what I'm habituated to, so I'm just going to stay in this knowing container. It's not might not even be a good container, but I know it. So there's some safety in knowing what it is. But that is a process, in my opinion, of decay. So I always tell folks, if you're stuck, you need to go to reflection. You need to take a pause. Vision happens in in receptivity. Strategy happens in receptivity. They use different parts of the system, like we were talking about. One's more intuitive, one's more probably analytical, but they still use receptivity. So it's not a doing. Vision and strategy come from receptivity. And so with that, I'm going to give a little bit of a formula, which is, okay, I want to create a strategy. I call this the gap analysis. I didn't invent it. It's something that's quite known in the business world, where to create a gap analysis, you basically first start with, you guessed it, a vision with an objective. Like, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? From there, you think about the future state. So who do I need to be, or who do we need to be able to achieve that objective? So if I really imagine myself fully achieving the thing I want to get, like, what am I? Who am I? What am I doing? What am I feeling? Would it really paint a picture of what the future state looks at? Then step number 3 is you do a current state analysis, which is a fancy way of saying an honest assessment of where I am right now today. And from there, you can see, where do I want to go in the future, where I am today. And then you pick 3, maybe 5 things that need to change and need to shift from today to tomorrow to get the objective. So if I use a concrete example, if my objective is to create a amazing technology company, well, what does a technology company have? Well, we can say what they're probably going to have is some form of AI. They'll have this amount of employees. They'll be in these markets. And then you look today and you're like, well, we actually have no technology. We're not in these markets. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. So what needs to change between today and tomorrow to get there? Oh, we need to hire some people. We need to acquire a technology company. We need to create a culture of innovation. So then you have these strategic principles, And from there, we go back to tactics. Okay, so I want to become an innovative culture. Well, tactically, how do I do that? Well, I can do a workshop for my employees on embracing change and adaptation. So I hire 3P Coaching and Solutions to do that. So there are things that we then break it down to on the individual level that add up to strategy. The beautiful thing about strategy is that it can help organize your people. If I go to a business sense, vision points them in the same direction. Strategy gets them moving in that direction in a similar way. It's how we stay consistent. If we don't have a good strategy, then each person is kind of just doing their own thing, which doesn't help move an organization, a body of people, a community of people toward your goal. And so a good business strategy, in my opinion, will always also have a human component, which is every business needs humans to execute a strategy. So you have to figure out how the humans will add up, how their behaviors will add up to getting your objective. So if we think about a business strategy, you should always have a leadership strategy. What do you need of those leaders, of those people to pull off that business strategy? In my opinion, and it's the work we do with 3Peak, we really want people to have the right skills, the right behaviors, the right relationships, and the right human systems to be able to pull off your strategy. These things need to be aligned and pointed in the right direction. So we talked about how individuals, even babies, can develop behavioral strategies. But when you have 100,000 employees, you have to make sure those behavioral strategies line up with one another so people are doing the right things at the right times to move the organization forward. Another thing I'll share on strategy is that I believe good strategy factors in linear time and space. It's bound by reality. It's about physical creation. And when I look at master strategists, I really start to see them more and more as Neo from the Matrix, the movie The Matrix. So Neo, when he looks around, he sees all those green numbers streaming everywhere. I find that master strategists start to see the world as equations, as formulas, as algorithms, that they basically start to understand what the input is and what the output will be. And they become flexible between strategies. So they're able to adopt and drop things as they come. Ultimately, strategy is how we make decisions and how we see our reality. And so if I ask Mazen, I know you've also, not only have you worked with master strategists, I think you're related to a couple of them. What do you observe with our kind of master strategists and how they're able to take in inputs and leverage it to create outputs?
I really probably we know each other very well, but kind of I know why you're asking me this question after you shared your point of view on the strategy that it's bound in linear and time and space, which is a very wonderful strategy. But
I wasn't ready to drop the bomb yet. That was going to come later, that there is a point, there's a strategy. I was going to say it's like the strategy-less strategy beyond time and space, but I was going to start with just time and space first.
Okay, so ask me again the question so I focus, right? You have a vision for this question so I don't go and then open it fully and then I wait
So
for the
we're
sequence.
sticking with master strategists who are bound by time and space.
Okay. Master strategist. Like the first thing that comes to my mind. I'll give you an example actually. As simple. I used to call him the husband of my mother. And what I learned a lot beautifully from him, we lived together in the same household for about 20 years. I always called him master builder. He's a very good friend. My mom divorced, but he's a good friend. So master builder, what I learned from him, and also he was literally a builder of houses, chimneys, like he's a mix of artist and that execution. He's a mix of all of them. So the first word that comes is perseverance. And that's it. There's no strategy without perseverance. I used to see him on Saturday, tired and sick, and waking up in the morning and then taking shower, shaving, and putting his really good clothes on. And I'm like, why are you doing this? Why don't you chill? Right? I was a teenager. And then he learned how to be perseverant. And now he's a rich man. He really found success in what he's doing. because he really believed in what he was doing. He was giving the best and most beautiful thing, regardless what people think about him. And then now, after 20 years, people go and see the buildings he created, the chimneys he created, the houses he created, and they're like, my goodness, your work is amazing. And I asked him the other day, I was on the call with him, I was struggling with something. And I said, but what did you do during this time when you had people could not see your value, could not see your product? And then he said, I didn't mind. I was doing what I love. I knew what I was doing. It will last the test of time. And now everybody's like, congratulate me. It came 20 years later, but I found my success in my perseverance. So I see master strategists, I would like to call them master builders. And I have so much love and appreciation and respect for master builders. Whenever they fail in something, I never say, oh, I failed. They go and figure out. I'm like, it's incredible. So again, example him, he goes to a car and then he try it and goes and try something else. So they use the same equations to move on in different arts, in different craft, and that's why I call them master builder. So to be able to be in multidisciplinary and ready not to say, oh, but I need someone to do it for me. And I used to ask him, so why don't you ask this person to mainly do it for you? And you tell me, when you go bring your car, you have to know a little bit about the car. I'm like, man, I'm doing my Ph.D. in neuroscience. I'm all about thoughts, intellectual. I don't want to go see how the mechanic works. He looks at me and I'm like, so when he's going to tell you this costs 500 euros to change one thing that costs 20 euros, would you know? I'm like, no, absolutely not. He said, good. In my life as a master builder, I was never been cheated because I went with them. At least I knew the name of it. At least I tried it. So it's really bring lots of success to be a master strategist. You don't have to know everything, but give respect to all the arts that if it belongs to your business or to your project, to have a small, slight idea, because what you will build will be infinite and constantly ready to adapt and create something even better.
I know we do a lot of structures, exercises. We like to embody different archetypes. And so we have, throughout our research process for 3Peak, when we were creating our functional human systems core fundamentals, there were moments where you stepped in and embodied these master strategists, which anecdotally between the three of us, we've called the reality joker, because they operate in reality, time and space. And they're a joker in the sense of they can embody all different strategies, right? They're flexible. They can dance between these different ways of doing things. So it's a bit the Joker card. They're not stuck in something. When you have kind of embodied the master strategist, what do you notice in your body, in your mind? What does it feel like to be in that space?
As Mazen said, they persevere. But in the moment when you're embodied in that, you are centered. You are ready to take risks to get to your objective. So you have a 300, it's almost you have a 360 degree, you're ready to view everything. So you're very embodied, you are very grounded, and you're ready to adapt. Your thinking is adaptable, but you're very clear where you're going, and it will shift, but you stay on point. That's what I remember when we were doing a lot of the research.
And can you tell me if you recall, or even now if you kind of tap into it, there are other folks we mentioned that can form either an identity or get stuck in a particular way of doing things, a particular strategy, which we know from our research can also bring up different emotions and fear and mind and all that good stuff. What's the difference? What does it feel like really the embodied difference between someone who might get stuck in a behavioral strategy versus this master strategist we're talking about? How does it feel different to you in your body?
What happens for the master builder? He tries action. He can step on reflection. He can analyze. So he's ready to move in all these different areas of these different cycles, but it's very earthbound, and he doesn't get stuck. The master builder doesn't get stuck. He will also connect with other people, get input, but also at the same time is working out equations for how that can serve him best for his strategy and his objective. So even when there's input coming in from other people, they're very acute at finding what's going to serve them to move their strategy forward, on the ground, on point. They will filter out what's being given, what is good and bad, what serves them. Even if they have a mentor or if they have someone that's helping them in consulting, they may just pick up different pieces and only use those to serve them to move forward with what they want. It's a very physical, master build, goal-oriented movement. And you make lots of mistakes on the way, but they continue. And that's what I remember from the research when we were embodying it and really looking at it. Now I just had to really step back into that to remember this of how it was. Yeah, when we did a lot of research.
And I have to share that I believe this is really how I operate in the world. So I'm constantly feeding on formulas, and I can take it from almost anywhere, everywhere. I'm talking to someone about the most random thing, and I will learn something and connect it to something we're doing in work, in my personal life, and health. Like my ears are always open for little pieces of almost data I can plug into my algorithm to say, okay, this is how I move my company forward, but it can really come from very different places. For instance, I was recently talking to someone who was a master recruiter in the military. And I'm sitting there and I'm really fascinated because some of the equations he's giving me about how to recruit people into the military, I'm going to then go use to how to sell a leadership workshop to a corporation. These aren't the same things, but if you learn how to apply learnings from one domain to the next domain, you can always be learning and adapting and kind of fueling your own algorithm so that you maximize your chance of success. So we're going to do one more topic on time and still in the realm of time and space. And then Mazen, don't worry, we will eventually get to the beyond time and space. One other concept I want to talk about is something I call strategic drift, which is we might start with an objective, we might start with a strategy, but over time we can drift into a different strategy. So even the binary I talked about, which is you're either conscious strategy or unconscious strategy, isn't actually true. There's probably a whole range of activities and behaviors we can take part in between. And so in the beginning, I referenced the British captain, B.H. Littleheart. He has a really, again, great book called Strategy, which is all about military strategy. He analyzed over 200, I think, military campaigns. And based on his analysis, what he basically, he created this bifurcation where he said there's basically two strategies in military. There is the direct approach and the indirect approach. So he was talking about the direct approach. One of the most famous generals is someone named Karl von Clausewitz. And Clausewitz, his theory is basically you get more troops, more force, you go directly at your opponent and you smash them. And as long as you have a bigger army, you're always going to win. So you always go right to and knock on the door and then just smash them. And what Captain Hart was finding is that in almost every successful military campaign, it's the indirect approach that tends to win, which is you don't do that. You basically try and be more like water. You kind of flow around the situation. You see where your openings are. You try and surprise people. You try and be devious. You create confusion. And so one of the most famous authors is Sun Tzu, who talks a lot about this kind of military philosophy. And another one that Hart was talking about is Napoleon. And so one of the most fascinating, if you look at the actual strategies of Napoleon in the beginning, especially when he was winning a lot, is Napoleon's objective was to win, but his strategy was to confuse people. So he would never attack an army directly. What he would do is if there was two cities of an enemy that he wanted to capture, he actually would be completely indifferent of what city he would capture. And so as they heard, oh my God, Napoleon's coming, the people would go into the castles, into the cities, and they would close the gates. And so you have city A, and next to it is city B, and they would divide half and half. And they would wait to see which city is Napoleon going to attack first. And Napoleon wouldn't attack either of the cities. He would actually move his troops between both cities and then keep marching past the cities. And then they would freak out because they wouldn't understand, why didn't he attack the city? And so inevitably one of them would go into a panic, and they're like, oh my God, we can't see his military anymore. He must be attacking the other city. So they would all run out of the gates, run all out of the city, and start chasing him. And in that moment, he had won, because he had convinced them that he was basically, he truly was indifferent. If city A freaked out, then he knew he could take it. If city B freaked out, he knew he could take it. If they both freaked out, he could take both. It didn't really matter to him. His strategy was to put them, the phrase I love is, on the horns of dilemma. They were completely confused because they didn't know if he was going to go with A or B. And he actually would go with C, which is complete indifference. And in that way, he kept winning battle after battle after battle. What's also interesting about Napoleon is that the more successful he became, the more he stopped doing this. And the more he started to rely on brute force and larger militaries to attack his opponents. And what happened is Napoleon started to lose. And he lost in Russia. I think he lost, to the British at Waterloo. I'm not an expert on Napoleon, by the way, but he started to go with this, what I'll call a little bit more of a lazy approach. And this is what I call strategic drift, which is he had a winning strategy, he had a winning formula, but comfort bred this unconsciousness in him. And I also, I'm just going to be very honest, I think with our company 3 Peak, we experienced some of this where we had a strategy, and then we got a really nice juicy contract to begin 3 Peak. We got a second juicy contract, a third juicy contract. And along the way, we tried many things, but I think a little bit we got entitled of like, yeah, we're the best. We get these huge whales for customers. And then we forgot the kind of meaning of the dollar. So we've been in a humbling process of, I think, rediscovering a bit our strategic drift and realizing that we need to go back to what worked originally, which is really to be humble, to be in service, and that nothing is guaranteed in this life. We have to work for our money. So it can happen to anyone. And I think, and I don't know if you guys agree with that, but that's my perception, is that we had to learn that lesson, is that just because you win, you have to stay actually doing the formula. You can't just sit on your ass and it's going to come to you. And so with that, I want to ask Mazen, because you beautifully illustrated the core fundamentals to us. When I talk about the strategic drift, how success can breed comfort and how comfort leads us to unconsciousness, how do you relate that to some of the things you were sharing earlier with the core fundamentals?
Oh, I was waiting, because this is how how I work through this system and through myself. I wait, instead of thinking, I wait what comes up. And what comes up is, to answer this question, is I want us to define and success. This is where master builders and master strategists fall. This is where empires fall. This is where emperors fall. This is where any company, any leader, or any employee fall. When they've been working all their lives with dedication, perseverance, respect, regardless what they're doing, even if it's a war, but working hard, when they reach and then think they reach success only measured by the result of what they were really striving for, and then they start to celebrate success, and they drop their perseverance, their duties, their human connection to what is needed to continue on the path of knowingness, discovering the unknown. We drop into something that, I would say, if there's one guilt in this for body, is laziness. Because when we are lazy to clean ourselves, the body starts to decay. When we're lazy to bring our food, we die of hunger. When we're lazy to care of our children, they really have abandonment issue. So when success bring when we think success we achieved, that's it. This is where we fail. This is how Napoleon failed. This is how every single empire failed. Ottoman Empire, Greek Empire, every empire, the German Empire, the French Empire, the British Empire. We are very creative in building, but the moment we start to find it, we really want to maintain it, and then we refuse to change, where at the beginning it was all about change and expansion. The moment we consider ourselves successful, I'm tired of constant expansion and change. We stop expanding. When we stop expanding our own knowingness of oneself and our work, it's the demise. Our ego takes over. We say, but I don't need it. I have few millions. I can sit there and do nothing. And I'm like, you never know which crisis will hit. A pandemic, a war between Russia and Ukraine, a war in Palestine and Israel, a famine here, earthquake here. Nature is brutal. But it's brutal to wake up, to stay constantly awake. That's what I have to say now.
And so now we're going to move even beyond time and space. And I'm sure everyone who's listening is like, what the fuck do you mean? What have you been talking about all this time? So I'll draw 3 categories now. Up until now, we've talked about 2 categories. So category 1 is I have a behavioral strategy, conditioned or not, and I stick to that one strategy. It could be a personality, it could be something I learned, but that is what I do. And I kind of have this one tool that I run around the world with the hammer, and everything looks like a nail. There's another way of being, which is like, actually, I become the master of all strategies and adaptable between all strategies. But I'm still really in this builder mode. I'm really all about kind of creating in the here and now. And what if I told you there's a third category, which is operating outside of the parameters of time and space? And this is our third category, where strategies, in my opinion, cease to exist. But in a real way. In a real way. There is no strategy. But not in the same way as kind of the first group, which is like, I don't have a strategy, but I do. I'm just not aware of it. It's the subconscious, unconscious. Here is we're really talking about beyond strategies. And so I'm going to ask, I've referred to you as our quantum queen. I'm going to ask Krisana.
Yes.
When you've embodied this archetype, let's put it that way, can you describe to us what it feels like in the body to embody a space that is beyond time, beyond concrete reality?
So we call this quantum, and it's very connected and can see all the strategies, can see life, but is not interested in trying to make the equations. So it's a bird's eye view, and it's not goal orientated, but it knows it knows just outcomes, and it's in service.
I'm enjoying those silences. Oh. I'm enjoying those silences. Because the moment, Mino, you drop the word beyond strategy, there is this looming fear of the unknown. That's, I could feel it. And I really, even our audiences, like, what are they talking about? Because the humans, us, we have fear of surrender. I'm like, and this is now we're introducing. So for the audience, if you feel us speaking slowly, giving space, because this is the gaps of inner success, and to know how to go beyond strategy, to understand that all is well.
I'm not sure how to frame this question. It's for Mazen. Can you describe, if it's possible, in human words, in the English language, what it is to be in non-being? A state of non-being.
State of non-being or non-doing?
Non-being. Beyond being.
Yeah, I'm just my brain is like, is it gonna help the purpose of non-being? You really went farthest away possible. Actually, now I return the question. Just in your more formula way, what do you mean by non-being? I need to understand it to know how to answer it for you, that perspective.
When there's two modes, right? There's like I take in the formula, I take in the equations, I build in reality. And when I tap into something beyond that, then it's very difficult to put it into words, but there's a space of kind of being but non-being at the same time. There's something where it doesn't even make sense to pick up a strategy. It's beyond probably my comprehension or my ability to articulate it. So I was curious if when you are beyond, just beyond like the strategy doesn't even make sense in this realm.
Yes, Krisana has it first.
Because you know equations. And in that space, you know that equations don't work there.
Really, between the conversation, I see what you call beyond being, from your perspective as master builder working only on time and space and working on equation. Actually, I am calling full being. So this is why there's a terminology from the perspective of your question, and Krisana, because she's a good bridge and she really helped us. It's a state of beingness that in it it's beyond doing. When we constantly are thinking in strategy, we're constantly trying to survive. That means we're only relying on the physical body as a way of survival, but we do not let go to our beingness, which is the subconscious part of who we are, which is the soul, whatever you want to call it, or the subconscious. And in that state of beingness, how many of us can be in a state of beingness, yet feel assured that what they're doing is all right, by sometimes not trying to understand everything? And that's my question to you. Can you be in a state after you put the intention and you start working on it? Can you be doing something without knowing what's the outcome and really working, but not seeing outcome, not seeing results, and just sticking to it, but trusting that you should do that without any feedback loop? What happens to you in that scenario?
And there's different kind of ways I operate. So part of me freaks out because feedback loops for me are very like important and urgent to have. So if I have feedback from my environment, then yeah, I'm taking input in. So then I know how to adjust. So for me, there's like a real big necessity for feedback loops. There is a part of me though that has touched things in my life where I can go beyond and almost suspend the need for that. So it depends where I am, like what I'm toggling between in life. But in my daily working day life, if I put it that way, it's very difficult not to have feedback loops. I feel like when I don't, I feel like I'm in this the padded room, right? Like the insane asylum, where I'm like I can't see, I can't hear, I can't taste, I can't touch. I'm like I don't know what's happening to me right now.
Yes, so you need physical sensation. You are bound by the body consciousness, which is that's what we're talking about. So the reality is inhabited in time and space, but this is why you become a master strategist, master builder, but there's still something you are vulnerable to. And actually here I will give it from a space beyond time and space and a space of beingness. What if I tell you that in that state where you master build the building only on formulas on an analytical way, even feeling analytical, what if I tell you you are really susceptible to give your power away at any single moment? And what your kryptonite is the fear of the unknown. But what if you start to befriend the unknown and understand what really is intention, how to let go once you have a clear intention and allow your beingness to start doing without having a feedback loop. But even if I tell you, can you imagine yourself not for one day or like 1 week? What if you are in a non-feedback loop for a year creating a business? You'll go mad, right? But what if I tell you that feedback loop that you needed is the thing that I will use? Imagine now we're in a, whatever, it can be this war, non-war, whatever, anything. And where you have your strategies, I have mine. Since I know how you function, then actually I know how to manipulate. So in the place of beingness, awareness is needed. We cannot reach it without awareness. So since I know what I'm capable of, I'll bring awareness, because if I abuse it, I will pay the price very, very heavy, more than others. But what if I tell you now, based on that feedback loop, I start to give you positive feedback loops? What happens if you react positively and you will feel motivation and yes, I'm doing something. So that means you're very influenced by a positive or a negative. But that does not mean you're on the right or the wrong path. So you're very dependent as a reality joker, as a master builder, as an emperor, as a leader, that it's only based on the outcome of now. That means you let go of the vision. You are changing constantly the vision based on the feedback loop immediately. You're on the stock market. Oh, it's going up. Let me buy it. This is gambling. And here's my question. Why you forgot the grand vision? And this is where strategy beyond strategy is based on the original vision. And to let go of the outcome and the feedback loop for a bit, or like not to be dependent on it. And then the feedback loop is a confirmation from within. Here I have to introduce meditation. Here I have to introduce awareness, because it's not true you're not in a feedback loop. Your feedback loop become internal. It's your subconscious through your emotions and feelings telling you if you're on the wrong or right path. So you stop giving away your power to the outside to tell you where you are, who you are, what if your business is doing well, if your partnership, loving life is doing well, and you check within. What if I tell you in beyond strategy, you will have a constant, immediate feedback loop that is always in the moment, connected to intuition, even if you're going through crisis and a very what you consider a negative phase, even if it's a very hardship. But deep down, you know, because something inside of you confirming. So you don't need anymore the confirmation of the out, but of the inner, through awareness. And from there, care, respect. And then moving forward. And that's the leaders we need. The new leaders coming, the new kids that they will coming with the compass within. They're not only tuned into the physical reality only, they're tuned into the outer physical reality based on all the equation, but also they tuned into the inner reality. There exists a huge inner reality inside, so that they can go through time and space and within beyond time and space. And those the leader we need to be behind and support us in creating the new society we're going toward.
And I would like to add, as we're saying, master builder, master strategist, they have a step into this space, and that is through bringing in meditation and awareness. And it's not visualization or dream work, it's simply adding meditation and awareness into your life, so you have that space to drop into that space. We've seen it in our workshops when we see this certain archetype strategists. We've seen the feedback we get from them when they've allowed themselves, or they find tools to drop into this awareness, and through meditating, it's just an absolute delight for them, because they've discovered something that is an enhancement for the master builder, and it's a space. So it's just like a step into, so you can rise higher into that. You don't lose the space of the master builder. It's enhanced when you bring in meditation and awareness.
And I feel, for some reason, maybe it's a little formula in my own head, an important caveat is I believe if you are more of a dreamer archetype, not to listen to this conversation and misidentify what you're doing with what we're talking about. If you find yourself daydreaming a lot, you need to try something. So move into the world, move into trying, move into doing. What we're talking about is someone who is trying all kinds of different strategies, who is running and dancing and doing all the beautiful things across all these different quadrants. They might be receptive, they might be action oriented, they might be intuitive, they might be analytical, they might be into change, they might be into stability. They know when to bring the right formula for the right moment. Of course, everyone can use and benefit from awareness. So everyone has the capacity and potential to use these. And I just want to be careful that as we talk about this space that can be touched beyond strategy, it's not confused for I just sit and daydream.
Yes. And beyond strategy, if we do not have intention, we cannot be beyond strategy. So strategy becomes its initial seed. It's an intention. Why am I doing what I'm doing? So I know what I'm doing. I have a clear intention, clear purpose, clear where I'm going, and then let go, and then wake up every day, and then start doing what is needed, and then building. And yes, so but intention and let go to oneself, because the brain is not only the ego, not only the conscious mind, not only the analytical mind. The brain is a powerhouse of so much. Use all the power of your brain, and then that this is why we're speaking what we're speaking, going beyond surgery, is to use all the power of the brain, not only specific region.
So with that, I'm going to do a little recap of some of the topics we've touched upon. And if you have been listening to this, my invitation is to feel how the conversation was energetically at different moments, because I think it's quite indicative of these different things that we're talking about. So you'll notice sometimes I was talking faster and with more energy and more kind of assertiveness, and other times where we dropped into more stillness and had more silence, and the power of that and why we intentionally might have included that in the episode. So today we talked about strategy, starting even from the most personal, behavioral strategy. Like what do I do every day when I wake up? How do I organize myself? What am I putting my time towards, my money towards, my energy towards? We all do this. Whether we understand it or not, we all move into life with a strategy. Animals do it, babies do it. We all have a kind of a how in how we do things. If we want to get very technical and we're talking about a framework, there's the gap analysis, where we talked about you start with a vision, an objective, you translate it into a future state, where I want to go. You look at your current and do an honest assessment of where you're at, and you look at the gaps to create a strategy of how to get from point A to point B. We looked at both the intuitive side of strategy and the analytical side of strategy and some of the pros and cons that come with it. And we talked about strategic drift, when we get comfortable and we're in maintenance mode, and how sometimes then that can breed unconsciousness and lead to our demise. We talked about our master strategists, our master builders, who take in input. They learn from everywhere. There's this insatiable curiosity, and they take all of these formulas and create their own personal algorithm, and they dance between different strategies. They dance between different ways of doing things. And then finally, we touched upon a place that's beyond strategy, a place where we have intention and we have being, and we're able to actually transcend the parameters of time and space. And so with that, I'd like for each one of us to say some parting words and to just share whatever is authentically there after this nice podcast. We'll start with Krisana. Anything you would like to leave us with?
I would just like to say I never know where these podcasts are going, because they're really just questions and we give answers. And so it's really in the moment. And I'm just very amazed and surprised what opens. And I leave it with that. It was a beautiful, timeless time, space we were in together.
Wow. Yeah. I will leave us, the audience, with this wish of a advice whenever you're listening to this podcast. Remember one thing. Your brain is collecting information intellectually through everything we said, but know very well that what we might be saying is not why you were here on this podcast. You know very well that your subconscious was absorbing the silences, the keywords. You know very well that your brain learned way more than our words. Our words are very limited. Our words is only one facet of the truth, but it's not the truth. The brain will take, and your consciousness will take in the whole experience and then understand the truth. We are not the sayer of the truth. We are the guide toward the truth that is found only within you. So if you sit here as a strategy to learn from us to be the best strategist without awareness of who you are and how your brain function and your consciousness function, you will miss it another time, and you will go on to another podcast and you will try to learn it from another podcast and another. What if you drop, stop, let go, have the intention to know yourself more, to understand how to be in the world, to start to know how to trust, to have more self-compassion. So I invite you another time, now, a second time, a third time, after a few years or immediately after. What if you listen to this podcast without thinking? What if you just not hear, but really fully listen, full presence, while not thinking and trying to connect the dots? Just put it in your ears and just be with this transmission of today. Again, it's a transmission of our three voices, but actually it's transmission of silence, of the energy in between each one of us, the three of us, and every audience, every time you really will be listening. And remember one other thing, that whenever you will be listening, for your consciousness and your brain, it's always in the now. So we will be in your ears, repeating the same thing, even if it's after 5 years, and it will have an effect as if it's recorded now.
For once, I don't know what to say. I really enjoyed talking about strategy. I love strategy, as it's probably clear. I love all kinds of strategy. I love taking them in and breaking them apart and using them and stealing. And it's all about the formulas in my brain and how I can use them. And what I enjoyed about this podcast episode is that it was really, in some ways, paying respect to the mind, the executive function. And this is my moment to also plug in, it is completely incomplete if we do not also bring in the body, the emotions, the feelings, the things that we've also touched upon in other episodes. So if you were to only listen to this episode and not take those into consideration, then your formula is incomplete. Your strategy is totally incomplete. You need to also go listen to some of those episodes on emotional intelligence and the body and the feelings. So I had fun talking about the mind. My mind enjoyed it, but my body knows that there's something more that needs to be brought into the equation. And I'll leave this as a bit of a story. I guess I did have stuff to talk about. This week I did a guest speaker spot at Deloitte, the Big Four accounting firm. I got permission to share their name. So I was working with Deloitte. I was working with their coaches, and we were talking about strategy. And I was basically asking them to think about AI and the future of AI. And I asked them to think about technology and how things are going. And some people, they had a lot of fear. And some people had a lot of excitement. And we were thinking about how the AI thing, right, how it will impact us in our life or our work. And we were talking about strategy. And what they realized is like, well, the emotions I have are actually really clouding the future that I believe will happen. And so it's changing the strategy. And I talk about this all the time, that emotions affect vision, emotions affect strategy, but it was beautiful to watch them arrive at that on their own and to say, whoa, if I'm afraid of technology, then it'll skew my behavior and my vision. If I'm super overly optimistic, same thing. And so I leave this episode with really just an invitation to really tune in with the emotions in the body and to go check out some of those other episodes because they'll really fill out this one. And with that, I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll speak to you again soon.